This video today is going to be talking about what makes a narcissist and what makes an empath, and why it is that the two sides of basically the same coin are drawn together, because it seems to be quite a phenomena. I don't know whether it's always been this way and it's only recently that people have had the ability to talk about it, because we've got the internet and things now, so people can share their experiences, or whether due to the society. I think it's always been this way, but it seems to be a bit of an epidemic at the moment where people are kind of able to express about it and find out information about it that wasn't available before. But what I notice while reading about it and through my own exploration is the thing that seems to confuse people the most about the whole thing is what is a narcissist, and why are you as an empathic person drawn to them? So I'm going to try to explain it from a psychology kind of perspective, because obviously everything that happens is happening in our being, our own worlds. Each of our worlds are in our own little piece of the big picture, disconnected. And what I want to talk about is how it happens in the psychological realm. So, obviously it's only my perspective. What I see happens is that you're either born an empathic person or you're born with more of a head person. So you're either a head person or a heart person. And I think you are naturally born that way. I mean, I was always, from as long as I can remember, I was always very, very highly sensitive to other people's emotions and energy. Even as a very young child I was. I could tell whether somebody actually wanted to be with me or not. Even if they were saying they were, I could feel what was going on inside of them. And, you know, empathic people are very, very easily hurt. Our emotions we live in our emotions basically, and we don't have the capacity when they kick off to just go into our head and get away from them. We can't use logic and reason to outwit our emotions. They're stronger. So we're in this end where our emotions are the strongest thing in us, and we can't help feeling them all the time. So we can feel hurt and embarrassment and shame and things like that really, really easily. It can be triggered in us just like that. And we tend to blame ourselves for things, where the head people, the narcissistic type people, they've just completely disconnected from their emotional body. And they've built a false self over the top of their authentic self. So somewhere in them, cut off usually, well definitely, usually between up to about 12 years old, I think, this self cuts off. And it's because emotions are too much for them to handle because of the situation that they're in, generally speaking. They have to become up here, because if they're down here, they react in a way that their caregivers reject. And the same is happening for the empath, but it happens kind of in reverse. So the empathic person, usually when they are grown by narcissistic people, they tend to sink into this place where they cannot find any strength, because any time that you show strength or try to show logic and reason and stand up for yourself, which you find hard to do anyway because you're always in emotion, the narcissists that are growing you, as soon as they see any kind of that kind of thinking in you, they push it back down. They cannot have you thinking for yourself, because generally speaking, if you do stand up for yourself, it could jeopardize them in some way. And the most important thing to a narcissist is that the illusion of their life is not in any way shaken. And so as an empath, every time you try to show your narcissism, because we should be, and we are, if we're together and authentic, we should be half empathic and half narcissistic, so we can see the big picture and we can see how we stand in that too. And an authentic person who's together will not fall for being manipulated. So the empathic side might come out and feel sorry for somebody and be able to see from their perspective, but then if that person then is going to take advantage of them, the healthy narcissism comes out and goes, actually no, I won't have that. But in empathic people, this narcissism has been completely rejected. Now in a narcissistic person, their narcissism is at the front and their empathy has been completely rejected because it was too painful for them to have it. They had to stay in logic because, generally speaking, the parents that they had made it that if they showed emotions, if they riled up, the consequences of that would be too great, because they generally have mothers that are extremely domineering, and so there's actually no room for their emotions. All of the emotions in the relationship with mother are mothers, and they have to learn not to have their own, because if they do, it sets mother off even more. So for example, if they lose their rag when mother's going at them and they say something that is emotional, the mother will then use that over and over and over again, indefinitely, will continually bring it up and cause them too much hassle. And so they learn, using their intelligence, the more intelligent ones anyway, they learn to how to act to make it okay. And so they develop this completely false sense of self that can react in the right way that the people around them expect. And so they completely detach from their emotions, because generally speaking their emotions have been ridiculed and they've been made to feel bad for having any emotions. And also what happens is that, generally speaking, the dynamic within their parental relationship means that mother is extremely forceful. She generally tends to be more likely to be the sort of borderline, because she's got the empathicness. She can't get out of her feelings, and so the mothers tend to be very irrational, and they can go all over the place. They've got all sorts, because they're completely connected to all the emotional centres, so they changed all the time. And so they learn from this perspective of head, of just very carefully watching and learning how to react. And so to do that, to stay in that place, they have to disconnect from their emotions. And generally, their fathers are the kind of men that are either not in the picture at all, they're narcissists, they're generally cold, dismissive, they don't encourage their children, they're jealous of any achievements that their sons or daughters have, and they are basically shunned by their father. So inside of them, where their male energy should develop properly, it doesn't develop properly. They don't develop a strong male energy, and also their female energy is completely full of mother. And so they're in this place where, in fact, in their natural, there's nowhere to land. There's nowhere in their own head that feels safe, because the male side was programmed by father, who was distant and not nice, and they don't want to be like him. Yet he programmed them. So they can't accept their own programming. And then on the other hand, their feminine energy is completely full to the brim with mother. So where their empathy and their sense of self and authenticness should be, all that's there is their mother. She's filled that right up. So basically they've got their two parts inside of them, their male and their female energy, and they've actually had to move out of both and go into this completely made up world. It was the only way they could survive. And also they live inside this head, this made up world. And within that made up world there's a set of rules of how things should be. And they live in, it's a fantasy world where they build themselves up to be this hero. They had to, because nobody else was making them a hero. Sometimes mother makes them a hero, but she does it so absolutely cloyingly and so much that they can't accept her praise in the same way, because at the same time as her being the one that gives them the praise, he also doesn't really like her. They have this... Everybody fundamentally loves their parents. Even when their parents are terrible, there's something in us that always wants our parents to love us and to see us and to make us feel authentic. But these parents don't, because they only want you to be what they want you to be. So there's no room for them as a proper person. There's only room for them as what mother wants to see. And so they gradually disconnect from who they really are to be the projection that the mother and the father want. And so they get into this projection, and then they move right into it, and then they completely forget about the rest of their authenticness, and they completely believe the story they've made up in their head. Because when they feel the authenticness, they feel their real self, they don't like it. It's very uncomfortable, because this little self was left behind. It's basically like a little child in there that's hurt and crying. But because quite often these people are men, they can't go in the world being this hurt, crying little boy, so they have to put on a front. They have to try and be a man. But in fact, where their manliness should be is this horrible dad, and where their feminine should be is this witchery, tittery mother that won't leave him alone. And so he has to retreat into his head, and he has to make a fantasy where he can live, because otherwise it would be unbearable. But he doesn't know he's doing it. It's completely out of his ability to see that he's made this self, this made-up self. So if you point it out to him that he's not authentic, he really can't understand what you're talking about. And he thinks because you're empathic and you're emotional, which is what he went after you for in the first place, because you give him the supply he needs by being soft and sweet, the opposite to what mother was like. He chooses you because you have this soft empathicness that he so desperately craved as a child but didn't get. And so they find it in adulthood in women. But unfortunately, nobody can stay completely in that completely softness all the time. And so as soon as you start showing any kind of disapproval of them, because you will, because they are not right, and so they constantly do things that aren't quite right, but they can't see that. They can never drop into thinking, yeah, maybe that behaviour is a bit strange, maybe I shouldn't be like that. It's impossible. The empath, on the other hand, somebody says you're like this and you're wrong, the empath goes straight into, oh my God, I am. I'm so awful. I'm such a horrible person. Why do I have to be like that? Why can't I just be what he wants me to be? And then we start trying really hard to be that. And also when you're an empath, you can read people's emotions. And so you learn to be careful around them and not to trigger them off. Because when you do trigger them off, it turns into something quite crazy. Because they only have this reference point and they're not prepared to go anywhere other than that. So they become, as soon as they feel in any way challenged, they become instantly defensive. Defence comes out and it's at the front, and you've got no chance of getting beyond that. It's like a defence mechanism that comes out and it sticks right at the front. And they will argue blind, even if it doesn't make sense. And they will keep doing it until they break you down, because generally speaking, the reason it's happened is because you've stood up for yourself. And they can't have that, because they can't have their hero complex in any way messed with. Because if that hero complex was to break down, they would have to go to where they really don't want to go, because it's full of all the pain and the emotions and the cut-offness. So it's absolutely vital for them to stay up here. And so they can't ever see your point of view. And from where they're coming from, they think your point of view is silly, it's over-emotional. Why are you like that? Why do you have to be like that? It's like they wind you up, and then when you balk and you go, no, I'm not having it, I don't like that, they act as if, why are you being like that? Why are you being so emotional? I'm just saying, but they can't ever hear you, because they can't put themselves in somebody else's shoes. It's an impossibility for them to see outside of this. And so if you say, well, how do you think I feel? They will reply with, well, you made me feel this. So if you were to say, when you did that, I felt that. Well, last week you did that and I didn't like it. So they will always counter you with something you did. So they never actually hear you, because they're always in defence. And to them, you are always wrong because you're not fitting the model they have of you that's in their head. And if you will not play the game and match that, then they can't see that maybe their projection of you is not real. They see that you are not matching their projection. And because they can't possibly be wrong, the authentic person has to be the thing that's in the wrong, not the made-up image they have of you in their head. Now, when you meet these people, they do the love bombing thing, where they are absolutely fucking crazy about you. And generally speaking, you're doing the same thing. The reason this happens is because both of you are in rejection of part of you inside. He's rejecting his empathicness, you're rejecting your narcissism. So when you meet each other, one of you has the soft, one of you has the hard. You come together, feels amazing. And he feels like he wants to open up, he wants to tell you everything, because you've connected him to his emotions, his nice emotions. The lovely chemicals are coming down into his body and he feels great, which is a place they don't normally feel great. These people are usually a bit down, a bit depressed, the world's always being horrible to them. But you've made them feel, they think it's you that's made them feel so wonderful, and so they absolutely bombard you with lovingness, and that they will write you letters and buy you things all the time, and they just become totally obsessed with you because they're not used to feeling, so they associate those feelings with you. And on the other side, from the empathic side, all of a sudden you have this man who tells you that he's extremely strong usually, and that he's going to look after you and protect you and keep you safe and love you forever. Words you've always wanted to hear. And when you hear them, you feel brilliant. So the two of you come together and there's this wonderful brilliance going on. And you want to be what he wants you to be, and he wants to be what you want him to be. But unfortunately, neither of you can stay completely in the illusion. He can't stay up here in his illusion. So he'll be telling you all these wonderful things about himself all the time, and how great he is, and how he copes with things, and how sorted he is. But at the same time, if you challenge him in any way, he becomes completely not that, but still can't see it, because he feels that he's completely in the right to not be criticised. Because in this made-up world, he doesn't criticise himself. But when you say anything critical to him, this little child goes ooh inside him, which sends him straight into defensiveness, because the last thing he can bear is for that to actually be shown. And so you end up in a relationship where you're all walking on eggshells all the time, constantly trying to not wind him up or upset him, because if you do, the consequences will be unpleasant in some way or another. It will resolve in either you being attacked or him dissolving, because that can also happen. Sometimes, if they attack you, if you say something and then they will come back with defence. Now, generally speaking, we tend to do is we tend to just accept that. But sometimes they've done something that we just like, actually, no. And so our narcissist side comes out and we go, no, actually, that's beyond my pale, I'm not having that. And if you won't back down, the chances are that this will crumble and they will end up down in the child. And then what you see before you, it usually goes from absolute right to anger and losing it because they're dropping out of here and into here. And so they go through this phase. And so at this point, we're in the middle, they can become quite nasty. And then they drop into complete crumbling. And then they blame you for that. They blame you for attacking them and making them crumble. But all you're actually doing is trying to set a boundary. But you're not allowed to set boundaries, because once they're with you, they've got you up here. They own you. To them, you are something that now belongs to them. And so when you are not playing the game, when you won't agree or go along with what it is that they want, then there is this absolute crumbling. And then what you've got in front of you is a tiny child. And as the empath, when you see that happen, you immediately go into this place, because your narcissist goes back and then leaves your empathic side at the front, that then is going, oh my God, look what I've done. Look what I've done to him. He's telling you you've done this to him, and you believe it, because in the empathic side, there isn't the logic that's going, no, actually he did that to himself. He did that because you said that. But then he's told you that you've done it, and then you go into the place where you believe it. And so then you put up with it, and you try to avoid that happening. Because the thing is, from the empathic point of view, the reason you've gone after this man in the first place, the reason you were attracted to him, is because he appears to have this strength, because he tells you that he's really strong. And then when you see actually he's not, that messes with your world. You don't want him to be this little weak thing. And so you want him to be the man he told you that he was when you met him. This man who's ever loving, ever adoring, will love you forever, will look after you forever, will be your saviour. And then in the end you see, oh, he's just a little boy. You don't want him to be just a little boy. And so you try and build him back up to be this thing that you want. And so you're both living in this kind of fantasy. And it's a complete headfuck. But you end up living in a headfuck. But the chances are, 9 times out of 10, you were grown in a headfuck. You were brought up by people where it was all fucked up. And so you don't quite understand how fucked up it is, because it's what you've always known. Because the type of narcissist that the empath goes for generally tends to be a replica of the man that taught them how to love. So if that man that taught you how to love was a narcissist, when you see narcissists, you're drawn to them, because that's who taught you how to love. But at the same time, generally you don't quite trust it. And so we don't trust our own narcissistic side, our own part that can stand up for us and say, no, actually, I will not have, I will not put up with. It gets shunned to the back. And also, because it was trained by a narcissist, when we experience narcissistic behaviour, it doesn't feel as wrong as it should. Somebody who wasn't raised by narcissists, if they had that part would go, whoa, no thank you. But when you have been, it feels normal. But something in you knows it isn't normal. But it's very confusing, because the feminine part loves this particular type of man. It's the type of man they were trained to love. And so she's drawn to them like a moth to a flame. And they're drawn to you too, because they feel your openness. And it becomes this very strange thing. And we can't understand. It's very, very hard for an empath to get their head around the fact that narcissistic people don't really feel anything. It's all up here. So when people talk about emotions, they know the word emotion, they know the emotion, the word of that emotion, but they've cut off their own. So they might say, yeah, I know, but actually they don't have any knowledge of emotions, only the negative ones. But they don't want those. It's kind of like, if you cut off your emotions, you actually cut off them all, because you can't only cut off the ones you don't like. And so to go up here, you have to cut off everything. And so they feel very empty and alone, but of course they're projecting outwards that they're absolutely fine and they've got it all together. But in fact there's no substance, because without emotions and you're just stuck in head centre, the emotional centre is pushed right down. So they just live in an empty space. And so they need other people to give them their emotions, to continually reinforce the fact that they feel empty. So when somebody says something nice to them, it connects them to their nice emotion for a second, a minute or two, and they have a little flurry of, yes, I am okay. And they crave that desperately. And they want you to give them that all the time. But as an authentic person, you're not always in the mood. Sometimes you have other things to do. You're in a different place in your head. You're not in the place in your head where you're about him. Sometimes you're somewhere else, and you're not allowed to be anywhere else. You have to be always in the centre where he is the centre of your universe. And if you're not, he feels attacked. So then he will go and look for other supplies to give him that. These men often have a harem of women that they can go to when you're not giving them what they want. And then they will go to those women and they will tell them how terrible you are and how much they suffer because of how horrible you are. I've seen that with men coming to me, in that kind of, you're so nice, you're so soft, my wife's awful, she's such a bitch, she's so hard-nosed, she's so unloving. But what they don't realise is they've driven her to that. She's basically gradually just withdrawn from him because it's so difficult for an empath to be in a relationship with a narcissist that you end up becoming smaller and smaller because they won't allow you any power. They rob you of that power because they want to be your power. They want to be the thing that you turn to all the time with anything. And they don't want you turning anywhere else. They want you just looking at them adoringly all the time. And if any time you're not, it causes this feeling inside of them that they're going to be rejected. But it's coming from here, but they can't feel it coming from here. They project it onto you. So they have this feeling of, oh my God, I'm going to be left. And they don't think, oh, I feel that because when I was a kid, I did get left and mum was, did this, blah, 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 blah. They go, she's going to leave me. And then they put it on you. And then they come out with all these weird, strange things, made up stories that they have, that you're thinking or doing or how you're going to behave. And I know that you're all thinking. And it's a very strange thing to be on the receiving end because they won't have it that you're not. Once they've decided something you're thinking or feeling, then there's no backing off of that. They won't go, oh, maybe you're right, maybe you don't feel that and I'm wrong. They will just keep pushing it. But they won't connect it in any way to the fact that they have trauma in them. And so because they're completely disconnected here, they assume that anything that happens that makes this happen is coming into them, inwards from the outside. What they don't realise is that something happens on the outside and it pokes at that and that goes like that because they've completely forgotten about that. So it must be you. It must be this other person that's making me feel like this. It must be this other person that's making me feel like I'm not good enough but they still think they are good enough. They just can't believe that you can't see it. And they can do this even when they've done things that are really unreasonable. They will not go into the place where they go, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. They might say sorry, but it'll be sorry in that, look, if I've upset you, then I'm sorry that you're upset. But, and then they will have lots of reasons why their behaviour is completely reasonable. If it isn't reasonable behaviour, then they may drop into, I'm going to change, I'm going to try, I'm sorry that I did that. But the next day they'll do it again, because there's just literally no authenticity. Because it's all thinking, no feeling. And with the empathic people, we're the other way around. We end up, when we get attacked, we end up down here, going from all through our emotions, not knowing what's going on, not being able to work it out. And then we end up looking like the irrational ones. Because they're coming from here, quite often they can stay, they don't have emotions. They stay in logic, reason. It's crap logic and reason, it's their own. And it obviously isn't logical or reasonable, but in their made-up world it is. It's completely. That's the rules they live by, and so will you. And if you express anything that's different from those rules, then you must be crazy. These men will always end up saying that their woman is crazy. But what they don't realise is that they cause the craziness by their behaviour. They never associate their behaviour to your reaction. They always associate your reaction to the fact that you must be a bit crazy. How can you think that, feel that? They don't feel anything really, except for this made-up grandiousness. But that needs to be constantly fed by an outside force, because it actually has no real stability. Now, this is how we end up joined together, because we're both fragmented internally. The male and the female energies inside the person are not together. And so when we are not together internally, we just keep repeating the same patterns externally and bringing them in. It's like we reject, the female rejects her male energy because it was programmed by a narcissist and she can't trust it. And so she then finds a replica of the narcissist that trained her in the outside world. So you're still going for the same thing that's in your head, because you recognise it as, oh, that's what makes me feel good, because the feminine energy moves towards that. She's in rejection of her own male, so she finds him outside instead of inside. when we start to look through our own craziness and undo our own programming, gradually, internally, these two parts of us come together and they stop arguing, they stop falling out so much, and they can become whole. So you can become a whole person that can walk through life like this, instead of this, where you're rejecting half of yourself, he's rejecting half of yourself, and you're bound together. You become whole. When you do that, you can spot them a mile off. And they lose interest in you because they need just the empathy at the front. They just need you to be extremely soft, loving, kind. When you have your narcissist side too, you can be this soft, loving, kind, but when they overstep the mark, this comes out and goes, no, actually. And then they will back off because you're not giving them what they want. But it depends on how infatuated they are with you, whether or not they will leave you alone. Because they own you. And so if you want to break away from them, to them it's just, they can't have that. They have to keep reeling you back in, even if it means treating you really, really badly. Because sometimes these people, they will verbally attack you in a really unpleasant way, and then they go away, they come back, they go, sorry about that, I didn't know, blah, 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 blah. And then they expect you to just be able to drop it. And then they can't understand why you're still mentioning it, or you're still upset, or it's like they'll do things like be unpleasant to you on the way to an event or something. Then they get there and then they put on the charm for everybody else and they will treat you lovely. And then at the end of the event you get back in the car and you're still hurting from the fact they hurt you earlier. So then you bring it up. You say, earlier on when you did this. And then they're like, why are you going back to that? God, we've just had a lovely time and now you're spoiling it. But because you're feeling. Him then just being horrible to you and then being nice to you doesn't counter the horrible, and you're still feeling that horrible, but he's gone past that. He didn't do anything wrong. Oh God, I didn't mean it. I was just, because they don't understand that feelings hurt you. They understand when their feelings are hurt, and they will tell you that you've hurt their feelings by just having an opinion, but yet they can't connect to your own feelings. And so the thing is, in these relationships, there will never be harmony there can be harmony for a long time as long as you play the game. If you continually be what he wants you to be, then he'll be fine with you. But if you won't be that, then you will suffer. Because he will not be able to accept that you are a whole person, because to him you are only the image he has in his head, and you are interchangeable. Who you are is actually not important. He can drop you and find a replacement just like that, because you don't actually exist. You only exist as something in his head that he owns, and then when he doesn't want it anymore, he'll throw it away and get another one. And he won't ever think, the reason when he throws you away, he won't think this person was good. He will think she isn't good. She's not what I wanted her to be. So he finds a new one who he thinks might be. And of course she never will be. It can't happen. She may be somebody that can suck it up well, and she might do so for a period of time. But as soon as she starts to have any kind of wants and needs of her own, he doesn't like it. They don't like you having wants and needs of your own, and they will break them for you. They are real dream breakers, because if you want anything that may challenge their sense of made-up self, then they will reject it, because it might mean that you might move on without them, or you might become something, and they can't have you being anything other than their support. They want to be out the front being this brilliant thing, and you behind them slightly, thinking how great they are, not standing up for yourself, not speaking up, not having an opinion that's different from theirs, not being anything other than the image that they have of you. And as soon as you're not that image, you're in trouble. And from the other point of view, from the empathic point of view, because we were pushed down, we're used to being pushed down. We're used to being rejected and hurt like that. And we think it's kind of normal, but we know it isn't, because there's always something in us, the red flags going off, going, this isn't right. That's your authentic being who has respect for itself, is your own narcissism, basically. Your narcissism should be able to come up and stand up for you. But it's been squashed down so much by narcissists in the past, and then you've brought another one into your life, you just end up this, because you quite often you can't understand why you're doing it, why you're allowing it to happen, but at the same time you're completely powerless to stop it. And that will continue until your narcissist gets strong enough that it goes, actually, fuck off. And then people can get away. Like you see people that have put up with it for years and years and years, and then something is just one step too far and you go, no more. I mean, I had that in relationships I was with someone for a long time and he made me miserable because he wasn't cruel, but he was just extremely hard to be around because he was just so irresponsible in ways, and, you know, drinking, gambling, just constantly every day something. And I put up with it for years and I felt so empty and alone in that relationship. But then one day we were out to dinner with some friends, his work colleagues actually, and I was looking at him across the table and he was so drunk he could hardly speak. And I'm sat there with these friends of his that were a pair of arseholes. And something in me just went, I'm not doing this anymore. I got up, went in the toilet of the restaurant and I just went home. I couldn't go back in, I just thought, I can't. And I went home and I told him that it was over. And of course he tried to persuade me that he would try harder and that, you know, he would be better and all of that. But it was that my own narcissism was like, no. And it never backed out, it never went back to it. But then it just found out what it did then is, because I'm programmed by narcissists, and that's what I like, I went from the more overt into the covert. So you think you're getting something different because this person seems to be very sensitive where this person wasn't sensitive, but actually it's the same. It's just in a slightly different form, but it's still narcissistic. The chances are, if you were raised by narcissists, all of your relationships will be narcissistic until you can own your own narcissism. That's what has to happen. Empaths have to learn to own their own narcissism. You have to accept that narcissists will never own their own feelings because it's too painful. But if you can engage your own sense of narcissism, the right to be a person, the right to stand up to yourself, the right to have dreams, the right to want things that don't include him. I mean, why shouldn't you want things that don't include him? Because it doesn't mean that you don't want to be with him, but it just means that you have wishes and hopes and dreams of your own. But they can't let you have any, because it might mean that you leave. And if you start to get strong, you will be discarded. Like in my experience, in my last relationship, I changed so much that my narcissism was allowed to join, and I did start standing up for myself. I stopped reacting to the put downs and the stuff like that. I was just looking at it, it's fascinating. And so I wasn't giving the supply that was needed. And so he lines up somebody else, carries on the pretense right up to the last minute, and then drops it like a sack of shit and gone. And what put me onto this was seeing how this man, who for 12, 13 years had acted as if I was the most important thing in his world, could suddenly drop me like that and just leave. And as soon as he told me he was leaving, it was like a completely different man stood in front of me that I'd never seen before in my life. And it was just like, here's now, his infatuation with me had come off of me and been put on somebody else. So I was absolutely no longer even considered anything, because his new supply was giving him a more supply. She was giving him more supply. I'd stopped supplying him in the same way. I'd stopped when he had paddies, reacting to them and trying to make everything all right. When he had paddies, I would just kind of watch and just think, And I would still try and not appease him, but just the way that you would a child, basically. I would, what's the matter, and do all that. But it wouldn't make me riled up. And they need that. They need to be able to dominate you. And if you stop being able to be dominated, they're stumped. And so they have to find somebody weaker. So if you get strong, they will go off with somebody who is weak. They will replace you with somebody who was as weak as you were when they met you. Or, on the other hand, they may completely squash your strength, so you're just a complete wreck, and then they'll leave you for somebody stronger than you, because look at you. Look at you, you're You're not what I thought you were. But what he doesn't realise is he's made you that. It works in so many different ways, but the disconnection is the same. But it will all depend, the disconnection and how they behave, even though there comes to be fundamentals that are the same. They don't appear the same because obviously they have a different personality, different upbringing, different way of speaking, different, and so you don't recognise it as the same. But it fundamentally is. And so the basic premise of this is that you cannot change him. You can't change a narcissist. You're on an absolute highway to nothing because they can never be wrong. But what you can change is yourself. You can embrace your own narcissism so that your narcissism comes out and matches his. Now, what often happens too is when they push you, our own narcissism does come out. But because we're in denial of having it and we don't like it, it feels horrible to us, then we reject it every time it comes out because we drop back into empathy, and then we feel bad because we reacted the way we did and we stood up for ourselves. And because we were told so much that we weren't allowed to. And often I think when our own narcissism comes out, you sound like your mother. Right? You hear your mother come out of your mouth. Now, when you were a child and you heard that mother coming out of your mouth, it was aimed at you, and you really didn't like it. It was the horriblest feeling. So when you hear it come out of your mouth towards somebody else, then you drop into that place of, oh my God, I'm acting like my mother. I can't believe I'm being like her. But you're acting like her because basically you're living out the same relationship she was. So you're reacting the same way because she was with the narcissist too. And so... And they push you to that point with their kind of complete lack of authenticity. And so, we reject that side, but we have to learn to embrace it because actually we have a right to stand up to for ourselves. We have a right to say no. We have a right to be strong. And until we do, we will be walked on all our lives. And so we have to learn to embrace our narcissism. And that is what will set us free, because a narcissist will not fight with a narcissist. They don't like it. And they know that they always have the upper hand because they can always make you drop back down into emotional centre and think that you deserve the things that are happening to you. Another thing is, you will only go for the kind of narcissist that programmed you. So other types of narcissists, you can spot them a mile off and you won't go there because your own inner narcissist will come out and go, no. You won't go for one, you will only go for the type that matches yours. So, for example, in my family growing up, all of the discord, all of the craziness from my narcissistic stepfather was very, very covert, and it was very cerebral. He was a cerebral narcissist. So that's the ones that I can't see. So I can see... if somebody came to me and they had a violence about them, I would know immediately and I would back off because that's not how I was trained. That would bring out my narcissist and go, no. But when it's the same kind of narcissist as the narcissist that programmed you, you're completely blind to it. You just can't see it because that's part of your psyche, that kind of behaviour, because it was programmed by them. So what we have to do is unprogram ourselves. Because when we unprogram ourselves, we become authentic and we can actually go on whether something really feels right. Not just the programming feeling right, but how do I really feel about that? How do I really feel? And we can only do that by becoming whole and strong. And how we do that is by, when we notice this inside of us, is to turn towards it and say, what is out of whack inside of me? What is reacting like that? Why is it reacting like that? Why am I behaving like that? Like quite often I see on the narcissist forums, women, they get away from him and then for some reason or other, no matter what he's done or whatever, they have this urge to go back. But that is because basically you're trying to find that love that you wanted so desperately from your father. And when you don't get it, you feel empty. And so you end up going back because basically you're trying to feel what you should have felt when you were a kid. And these people are the nearest that you can get to that. And so when we move away from them, we have this childish energy in us that really wants to bring it back in. But of course, it just makes this perpetual cycle continue over and over again. We have this detachment thing. And also I think quite a lot of empaths, we have a bit of a social phobia and things like that. We don't feel very strong in the world because we're empathic. We absorb everything, and so when we go in the world, for us, it's quite challenging, because so when we're with a narcissistic type, they don't seem to feel that at all. They seem to be able to cope with the world. They can put on a different mask for any occasion and always appear to be strong. And so we kind of feel safer because it feels like they will protect us. But actually, this strength is not real, and behind there is just a tiny little boy. And so quite often, even though they're acting like they're, or think they are, actually they're acting very much from this little boy. But they can't have you having your energy any bigger or stronger than theirs. So if they're kind of 10 years old inside, they need you to stay that, or 9, because they need to be the one that's bigger. And so they keep you in this very enclosed, childish kind of energy. Because if you're suddenly grown up, then you squash this false self. And so you end up in this sort of trapped place where you don't really know what's going on, because it feels wrong, but it feels right, because it's what you know, but it doesn't sit well. And you end up really confused. And we tend to just turn a blind eye to the craziness and try to make it all right, and try and stay in the place where we're not winding them up or not upsetting them. Which leaves us always feeling on edge. And the thing is, when you're on edge, you're much more likely to be compliant. They like you on edge, because when you're on edge, you're weak. When you're not, when you're in the nice chemicals and you feel strong, they can't have that. They can only have you feeling nice and strong if they've made you feel nice and strong. If anything else does, they have to break it. Anybody, anything. They can't take it. They can't take you looking towards someone else with love. It does this to them. They need all of your love, all of your attention. And when they can't have it, they go into this little childish mode. Basically, there's a little child in there that's crying every day, crying all the time. It's been completely ignored, and up here is this grandioseness where they will not drop from, and they will not have it that they're anything other than that. And it's very hard to live with somebody like that, because basically you're just pulled into their weird fantasy, and you're expected to comply with their weird fantasy and follow all the rules of their fantasy. And it's no way to live. So yeah, that's kind of like, hopefully, a fairly good explanation of what the hell is going on. If you have any questions, because since this has happened to me and I actually have seen through it, I can see it everywhere. I can see them everywhere. I understand it now. And so if you have any questions that you would like to ask about any kind of narcissism or behaviour, please ask in the comments, and I will make a video talking about answering the questions. Because knowledge is power. And the more knowledge we have, the more powerful we can be. The more we can build up our own narcissists to help us out of these situations. So yeah, nice to speak to you, and hopefully this has been useful, and have a nice day.